Microsoft just dropped Windows 12, and while millions of people are hitting that upgrade button right now, I'm sitting here with my hand firmly off the mouse, and I have very specific reasons for that. This isn't technophobia. This isn't stubbornness. This is the result of watching Microsoft's upgrade cycles for over a decade, and learning the hard way that being first means being a beta tester. And right now, you're about to find out exactly what I found when I spent the last several weeks pulling apart everything Microsoft has published, everything the early testers are reporting, and what history tells us about Windows major version launches. Let me be direct about something before we go further. If you're on a brand new machine that shipped with Windows 12, this conversation is a little different for you. We'll get to that. But if you're sitting on a perfectly functional Windows 10 or Windows 11 system right now, and you're feeling that itch to upgrade because Microsoft's notification banners are getting more persistent, I want you to hold on. Not forever, just long enough to make an informed decision rather than a reactive one. There's a meaningful difference between those two things, and by the end of this, you'll know exactly what to watch for. Let's start with what Microsoft is actually shipping here, because the marketing and the reality are two very different things. Windows 12 is being positioned as the most AI-integrated version of Windows ever built. That's Microsoft's framing. The Copilot integration is deeper than anything we saw in Windows 11. It's not a sidebar panel anymore. It's woven into the shell itself, into File Explorer, into Settings, into the right-click context menu. Microsoft calls this the Copilot Plus experience at the OS level, and on paper it sounds genuinely useful. On paper, here's what that actually means under the hood. The AI features in Windows 12, the on-device semantic search, the live captions with translation, the recall-adjacent memory features that Microsoft has rebranded and relaunched after the original recall disaster. All of these require the neural processing unit that Microsoft first started mandating for Copilot Plus PCs back in 2024. We're talking 40 tops minimum. That's tera. Operations per second, a measure of AI processing power. If your machine doesn't have that NPU, you can still run Windows 12, but you're running a stripped version. You're missing the headline features. Think about that for a second. Microsoft is shipping an operating system where the marquee functionality is hardware gated behind chips that most people don't own yet. The hardware story gets more complicated. According to compatibility documentation that Microsoft released alongside the Windows 12 announcement, the supported processor list is tighter than Windows 11's already controversial requirements. Intel, 12th generation and newer, AMD Ryzen 6000 series and newer, Qualcomm Snapdragon X series. Those are the performance tiers that get the full experience. Anything older than that, and you're in partial compatibility territory. Zach Bowden at Windows Central, who has been covering Microsoft's internal roadmaps closely for years, reported that Microsoft's internal testing data showed significant feature degradation on systems outside the recommended hardware window. This isn't speculation. It's pattern recognition from people watching these rollouts closely. The security architecture is genuinely new, and I want to be fair here. Windows 12 introduces what Microsoft calls Secured Core 2.0, which tightens the integration between firmware security, the TPM 2.0 chip, and the OS kernel in ways that Windows 11 didn't fully realize. Independent security researchers at Eclipsium, a firm that specifically focuses on firmware and supply chain security, noted in their initial analysis that the kernel isolation improvements are meaningful. This is real progress. But, and this is important, these are hardening improvements that matter most for enterprise environments, for systems handling sensitive data, for people who are genuine high-value targets. For the average home user on a well-maintained Windows 11 system, with current updates, the practical security uplift of upgrading today versus waiting 6 months is marginal. Security experts consistently say that a patched current version of any OS beats an unpatched new one. And right now, Windows 12 is very new. What the early testers are actually reporting is the part that kept me off the upgrade button. Paul Thurrott, whose Windows coverage is about as authoritative as it gets in this space, noted in his early build assessments that the Settings app has been restructured again for the fourth major restructuring across Windows 10 and 11, meaning that workflows you've built muscle memory around are just gone, replaced with something you'll need to relearn. Driver compatibility is spotty in the early weeks, particularly for older peripherals, certain audio interfaces, and some specialized hardware like drawing tablets. This isn't unusual for a major Windows launch. It's predictable. And that predictability is exactly why I'm waiting. Here's something I need you to think about before you touch that upgrade button. Cast your mind back to October 2021. Windows 11 launched. The hardware requirements, the TPM 2.0 mandate, the CPU compatibility list, caused enormous confusion and frustration. Microsoft's messaging was inconsistent. The initial release had real performance regressions for AMD Ryzen CPUs that took months to patch. The taskbar was missing features from Windows 10 that people actually used. The Android app integration that was positioned as a headline feature launched incomplete and was quietly killed years later. I'm not dredging this up to pile on Microsoft. I'm bringing it up because the pattern is directly relevant to where we are today. Every major Windows launch in the modern era has followed a recognizable arc. Announcement with impressive feature list, launch with real-world friction, 6 months of stabilization patches, and then somewhere around the 9-12 month mark, the version that actually works the way it was described. Windows 10 followed this arc. Windows 11 followed this arc. There's no rational reason to believe Windows 12 breaks the pattern, especially when the early reports are already showing the same kinds of rough edges. Now let's talk about why Microsoft wants you to upgrade now rather than later. This isn't cynical speculation, it's just understanding the business model. Every Windows 12 user is an active data point for Microsoft's AI training pipeline, for Copilot usage metrics, for telemetry that informs their product roadmap and their conversations with enterprise clients about adoption rates. Your engagement with Copilot features, your usage patterns, what you search for in File Explorer, how you interact with the new interface, all of this flows back into Microsoft's systems. They've been transparent about this in their privacy documentation, which most people don't read. It's like being handed a beautiful new house and then finding out on page 47 of the lease that the landlord has keys to every room. The house might genuinely be nice, but you should know about the keys before you sign. There's also the support leverage angle. Windows 10 end of life is October 2025. That deadline is real, and Microsoft knows it creates upgrade pressure. But here's what's worth understanding. Windows 11 support runs through 2031. If you're currently on Windows 11, you have years of supported life ahead of you. You are not behind. You are not at risk. You are running a supported, actively patched operating system. The urgency that Microsoft's upgrade prompts are trying to manufacture is not matched by the actual security reality for most users. When I realized the gap between the urgency being communicated and the urgency that actually exists, that frustration, is what pushed me to put together a framework rather than just a feeling. You're not paranoid for noticing that the upgrade pressure feels disproportionate to the circumstances. It does. And you're allowed to make a different choice. So here's exactly what I'm waiting for. 5 specific gates that Windows 12 needs to pass before I personally move my main machine over. These aren't arbitrary. Each one maps to a category of real-world friction that I've watched cause problems in previous upgrade cycles. If you're on the fence, use these as your own checklist. Gate 1, the 90-day driver stability window. For any major Windows release, the 60-90-day mark is when the most critical driver conflicts have been identified, reported, and either patched by Microsoft or addressed by hardware manufacturers. Right now, we're inside that window. I'm watching the community forums, Reddit's RR windows, the Microsoft Feedback Hub, the hardware-specific subreddits, and the current volume of driver-related complaints is typical for a fresh launch. That volume historically drops significantly after the first major cumulative update, usually 6 to 8 weeks post-launch. I want to see that drop before I touch the upgrade button on my primary machine. If you depend on your computer for work, and most of us do, this window matters to you. Gate 2, a verified recall variant assessment. Microsoft relaunched its AI memory feature, the one originally called Recall that got pulled after severe criticism from security researchers, including Kevin Beaumont, who published a detailed breakdown of how the feature stored sensitive screen data in an insecure local database. Under a revised architecture with additional encryption and opt-in controls, the rebranded version is shipping in Windows 12. I'm not saying it's the same vulnerability it was. What I'm saying is that independent security verification takes time. I want to see assessments from researchers outside Microsoft's bug bounty program, people with no financial incentive to find it safe, before I'm running this on a machine with banking information, client documents, or anything I'd consider sensitive. That's not paranoia, that's just due diligence. Gate 3, performance parity confirmation on non-NPU hardware. If you're running a machine from 2020 or 2021 that doesn't have a qualifying NPU, you are a second-class citizen in Windows 12's feature hierarchy. Before I upgrade a machine in that category, I want benchmark comparisons. Not from Microsoft's optimized test environments, but from independent hardware reviewers like Notebook Check, Tom's Hardware, and AnandTech, showing that day-to-day performance on legacy hardware is at least neutral compared to Windows 11. Some early reports are suggesting slightly higher background resource consumption on non-NPU systems due to Copilot service processes running even when the AI features aren't accessible. I want that either confirmed or debunked with data before committing. Gate 4, enterprise adoption signals. Here's a leading indicator that most consumer-focused coverage misses. Enterprise IT departments are conservative by design. They have too much to lose to be early adopters. The rate at which Fortune 500 companies begin validated Windows 12 deployments typically tracked. by Microsoft's own commercial adoption dashboards, and by independent analysts like IDC and Gartner, tells you something meaningful about real-world stability that consumer testing can't fully capture. Enterprise environments stress test compatibility at a scale and diversity that no single reviewer can replicate. When enterprise adoption starts moving past the pilot phase, typically around the 6 to 9 month mark for stable releases, that's a meaningful signal. Stay with me here, because this is actually one of the most reliable upgrade timing indicators that exists, and almost no one talks about it. Gate 5, the first major feature update. Microsoft has a pattern of shipping significant fixes and the initial wave of promised but not ready features in the first major cumulative update after a new OS launch. Windows 11 22H2 was materially better than the initial Windows 11 release. Windows 10's November 2015 update addressed a long list of launch complaints. I want to see what Windows 12's first major feature update looks like before I commit. That update tells you both what was genuinely broken at launch and what Microsoft prioritizes fixing. Both of those things are useful data. Now, a quick note on who this framework doesn't apply to. If you're setting up a brand new machine that's shipped with Windows 12, you don't have a meaningful choice here, and the calculus is different. You're not downgrading a working system. If you're in a managed enterprise environment, your IT policy governs this, not my framework. And if you're a developer, a tester, or someone who genuinely wants to explore new OS features and doesn't mind some friction, upgrade with my blessing. That's a legitimate use case, and those early adopters perform a genuine service. This framework is for the majority, people with working systems, real work to do, and limited tolerance for the disruption that early adoption reliably brings. Look, I'm not here to tell you that Windows 12 is a disaster. I genuinely don't know yet, and anyone who tells you otherwise after 2 weeks is lying to you. New operating systems take time to reveal themselves. The real character of a Windows release shows up at month 4, month 7, month 10, when the edge cases accumulate, when the compatibility issues surface across the full diversity of hardware and use cases that no launch coverage can fully represent. What I do know is this: you are not required to be on the cutting edge of an operating system to have a functional, secure, productive computing life. That's a choice, and it's a legitimate one. The pressure to upgrade immediately, the notification banners, the end of support timelines, the implication that you're somehow behind if you're not running the latest thing, that pressure serves Microsoft's interests, not yours. Your machine, your timeline, your call. There are millions of people running Windows 10 machines that work perfectly well today. There are enterprise organizations still on Windows 11 deployments that won't touch Windows 12 until well into next year. You're not an outlier for wanting to wait. You're in the majority. The tech media coverage skews heavily toward early adopters because early adopters generate engagement, but they don't represent how most people actually use computers. The bigger principle here is about ownership and intentionality. Your computer is a tool you've configured, learned, and adapted to your life. Disrupting that tool has a real cost, in time, in frustration, in the productivity hit of relearning workflows. That cost is worth paying when the benefit is clear and verified. Right now, for most people on Windows 11, the benefit of upgrading to Windows 12 today is not clear and is not verified. In 6 months, that calculus may look completely different. And that's exactly when I'll be ready to have a different conversation. If this kind of measured, research-grounded take on Windows and tech decisions is useful to you, subscribe. I cover these inflection points the moment the data becomes clear, not when the hype cycle says I should. And drop a comment. Are you upgrading now, waiting it out, or has this pushed you somewhere else entirely? I read every single one, and that feedback shapes what I cover next.